Welcome back to the deep dive. If you're, say, juggling a college tuition payment while also trying to figure out your parents' care needs, well, you might be part of what we're diving into today, the sandwich generation. Okay, let's unpack this. It's become such a common experience, hasn't it? But I think we often just brush off the enormous pressure to call it being busy. So the sandwich generation, basically, these are people simultaneously managing, the really intense burden of raising kids and caring for elderly parents. And the cost? Well, it's their personal time, often their financial security long-term, and frankly, their own health. So our goal for this deep dive is to go way beyond just saying busy. We want to really analyze the complex, multi-layered stresses these caregivers are under, and crucially, find some specific practical strategies for relief.
That's absolutely vital, because what the research shows us is this isn't just, a tough schedule. It's genuinely one of the most profound, sustained, and complex stresses that modern families are grappling with. We really need to dig into the current data to understand the sheer depth of commitment here.
Yeah, I think when most people hear sandwich generation, they picture someone maybe mid-40s, mid-50s, that kind of classic demographic. But the sources we looked at suggest this group is actually, ballooning and getting younger. What's the latest on how widespread this really is?
That traditional picture, it's definitely out of date. The reality is much wider and much younger than many people realize. Some recent research gave us some pretty surprising numbers, actually. Get this, 46% of millennials, nearly half, now say they fit into the sandwich category.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's alongside 18% of Gen Xers as well.
46% of millennials. That number alone almost instantly shifts this from just a generational thing to, potentially it's a societal crisis.
It really does. And think about what that means for these individuals. The dual support is just relentless. They're providing emotional support, physical help, significant economic aid to aging parents,
Right.
while at the same time often providing continuous financial help, think tuition, maybe housing support, general living costs to their kids. It's a support flowing constantly in two directions.
The sheer scale of that commitment is just, it's staggering. This isn't just, giving someone a lift to the doctor now and then. This is systemic, ongoing care, day in, day out.
Oh, it's far, far more than just a convenience role. When researchers actually tried to quantify the impact, the data really backs that up. A huge 75%, three-quarters of the sandwich generation report finding it very difficult to balance their own immediate financial needs, let alone long-term goals, with all these caregiving duties.
75%. That's huge.
And consider this one, 76% of caregivers feel that this kind of comprehensive, nonstop caregiving, it's pretty much equivalent to working a full-time job.
Yeah.
So you're essentially working your paid job and then running this second unpaid 40-hour-a-week care operation on the side.
That full-time job description feels incredibly accurate then, doesn't it? But if 76% are feeling that level of commitment, the stress can't just be about time, can it? It must hit deeper. So knowing the scale of it, how do the sources break down the different kinds of stress, the different dimensions of, suffering that the sandwich generation is going through? Here's where it gets really interesting.
Yeah, looking at it systematically is absolutely crucial, because the stress isn't just one thing, it's cumulative. It hits them on multiple, often unrelated fronts. The sources we reviewed tend to break this strain down into four key categories, and they really compound each other. First off, there's the psychological burden. This is that immense internal pressure, the drive to be the perfect parent, maybe. And that gets combined with these profound, really complex feelings of guilt.
Guilt, right. I can imagine.
Especially around big decisions. The choice, for instance, about placing an elderly parent in a professional care facility that often brings up the most intense guilt. And this huge mental load. It frequently shows up as, diagnosable anxiety, sometimes depression.
You mentioned the psychological burden leading to anxiety.
Yeah.
But thinking about reframing professional care, how hard is it for people to actually accept that reframing?
Yeah.
Especially when culturally there's still this narrative about abandonment.
Oh, it's incredibly difficult. That cultural pressure is immense, absolutely. Which leads right into the next burden, the economic burden. This is the really severe financial squeeze. And honestly, this might be the most damaging one long term for the caregiver themselves. We saw that truly shocking statistic on this. 59%, nearly 6 out of 10 of the sandwich generation said they've had to reduce or even completely stop saving for their own retirement.
Wow.
Because they simply have to meet the immediate financial demands from both sides, kids and parents.
59% stopping retirement savings.
Yeah.
That's not just putting things on pause for a bit, is it?
Yeah.
That sounds like it could create a systemic transfer of burden, like back onto the state or onto younger generations later when these caregivers themselves get older and haven't saved.
That's precisely the risk. They're essentially, well, cannibalizing their future stability just to survive the present crisis.
Okay, so psychological, economic, what's next?
Next up is the physical burden. This is simpler to grasp, perhaps, but no less serious. It's the relentless buildup of physical fatigue, chronic sleep deprivation. It comes directly from the hands-on duties of caregiving. And often it's not just feeling tired. It can manifest as stress-induced physical symptoms, chronic headaches, digestive issues, maybe a weakened immune system. The body just reacts to being in that constant state of high alert.
Right, the body keeping score.
Exactly. And then finally, there's the social burden. Caregiving, almost by definition, shrinks your social life. Activities, relationships outside the family, they contract. And this leads directly to a really profound sense of social isolation, withdrawal even. People lose touch with friends, they drop hobbies, and eventually they lose that vital support network, often, ironically, just when they need it the most.
It really paints this clear, quite grim picture, doesn't it? Where the caregiver, who's trying so hard to keep everyone else afloat, basically risks becoming this second unseen patient. They just burn out completely. Okay, that structural analysis, it really does paint a scary picture of burnout. But knowing the problem is one thing. Let's shift focus. What practical advice do our sources offer? For someone listening right now, struggling with this, what can they actually do to start building some protective walls?
I think the absolute fundamental shift, the core message is stop trying to handle it all alone. That's the starting point. So first, we need to talk about role redefinition and system utilization. What does that mean? It means actively sharing the burden, using the social systems that are actually in place. For example, if professional care facilities become necessary for a parent, the really critical move is to reframe how you see them. Not as abandonment, which is where the guilt comes from, but as a practical choice. A place where the parent gets high-quality, specialized care that, honestly, you as an individual probably can't provide 24/7 at home.
That reframing, that cognitive shift,
Yeah.
it sounds like one of the most powerful tools against that pervasive guilt we talked about earlier.
It really is, because it directly tackles the source of that psychological pain. We're also starting to see some interesting evidence around technological aid. There's emerging research showing that using things like social robots can actually help stimulate cognitive function in the elderly.
Robots. How does that help the caregiver?
Well, what's important here is how it reduces the family burden. These technologies can potentially take over some basic repetitive tasks. Think medication reminders, maybe cognitive exercises, appointment scheduling. If technology handles some of that, it frees up several critical hours a week for the family caregiver, time they'd otherwise spend on those specific, often draining duties.
Okay, so using tech lets the family shift back towards maybe more emotional connection rather than just constant task management.
Precisely. It allows for a different kind of relationship. Third, and this one is often the toughest, practically and emotionally economic boundaries. It's about the necessity of setting clear boundaries for financial support, especially for adult children, specifically to prevent the total collapse of your own retirement plan. Now, the data shows 72% of parents report feeling intense guilt when they have to decline financial requests from their kids. It's really hard.
72%.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's understandable guilt.
It is. But the necessity is stark. Establishing your own long-term financial stability, that ultimately benefits the entire family unit in the long run. Because if your retirement savings disappear, you simply risk becoming the next generation's financial burden down the line.
Right, that's the exact ripple effect we want to prevent. You really can't pour from an empty cup, can you? Especially not a financial one.
You can't. And finally, there's a really powerful piece of psychological advice: shedding the perfect parent myth. This means consciously recognizing that, child development isn't solely down to parental input. It's massively influenced by peers, by school, by the wider social world.
Right.
Acknowledging that reality can help release a tremendous amount of parental pressure. The goal shifts from unattainable perfection to providing a supportive, loving environment, which is much more realistic and sustainable.
These individual strategies sound really helpful, truly. But when I think back to that sheer scale, 76% feeling like it's a second job, feels like this has grown beyond just a personal issue you can solve with better time management or reframing. This seems to cry out for systemic support, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. You're spot on. When nearly 3/4 of a huge demographic are effectively running a second full-time unpaid job that demands intervention. governmental, corporate intervention. We need to see real, significant efforts. Things like strengthening long-term care insurance systems, implementing mandatory flexible work schedules becomes critical, providing mandated paid care leave options for employees, basically treating caregiving as the critical, intensive labor that it actually is.
So policy finally catching up with the demographic reality on the ground.
Exactly. And alongside policy changes, the emotional infrastructure is just as crucial. Families in this situation desperately need readily available emotional support. That means access to professional counseling services, structured self-help groups, peer support networks. The isolation we talked about, it's incredibly real. And community, shared experience, that's the antidote. And maybe, if I can, just offer a direct final encouragement to you, the listener, if you're in this situation. You are not alone. The numbers clearly show this is a massive collective struggle. And please remember, prioritizing your own health, whether that's physical or mental, it isn't selfish. It's the only way you can sustain care for your family over the long haul. If the burden feels like it's just too much, please don't hesitate to seek professional consultation. You absolutely deserve that support.
That's such a vital message. That self-care isn't an indulgence here. It's actually the essential first step to being able to care for everyone you love. Thank you so much for that incredibly clear, really insightful breakdown. You've really moved this conversation from just, a general complaint about being busy to a deep analysis with concrete, actionable advice on building resilience. And to everyone listening who's out there right now, balancing the needs of maybe two, sometimes even three generations, we really see you and we support you in that monumental effort. Now, we talked about that really alarming statistic, 59% of the sandwich generation having had to cut back and stop their retirement savings because of these demands. Before we sign off, I want to leave you with maybe a provocative final thought to mull over this week. Given that potential threat to your own future stability, what's one specific immediate action, just one thing you could take this week? Maybe it's finally looking at that 401k statement. Maybe it's drafting a quick boundary budget. Maybe it's just setting a firm date in your calendar for that difficult financial conversation you've been putting off.
What one step can you take to check in on your long-term plans, to ensure those boundaries are being set, not just for you, but for the benefit of the entire future family unit? That difficult check-in. It might honestly be the most loving and the most strategic thing you do all week, just something to think about. That's all for this deep dive. We look forward to our next exploration.